Hi, I'm Heather from here Booktubes, and today is a talk about minimalism, booktube consumerism, and kind of the overall culture of booktube versus minimalism and just the mindsets and the things that play into it. So where I am coming from is, first of all, I'm not judging anybody, I'm not criticizing anybody, I'm not saying my way is better than your way, and so I am morally superior to you. None of that. This is literally my experience and the mindsets I'd already gotten myself into before I even discovered Booktube, and so some of the kind of common themes of Booktube aren't something that I participate in because of the time in my life when I found Booktube and where my mindset already was. Basically, I have always grown up with lots of things. I grew up in a poor family. Always, my parents are still poor. I am still poor. If you look at the kind of income brackets, I'm poor. But I have what I need, so poor is objective, right? I have what I need and I have lots of things that I just want. I have lots of blessings. This is not a woe is me thing. But because of that, I definitely grew up kind of with a scarcity mindset in that when you got something, you held on to it because if you ever got rid of it and then needed it again, you would not be able to afford to replace it. So that entire mindset shaped my childhood and my family home. My parents are avid readers. They're both educators. I was homeschooled, but they also were educators in private schools for large segments of my life. All of that to say, they're readers. They've always been readers. And so we had a ton of books specifically. And all of our books, none of our books were ever bought brand new at a bookstore. That was completely outside the realm of our budget. And so I grew up on used book sales, library sales, yard sales, free books. When you are a homeschooler, they have these huge book sales where you kind of swap textbooks and source material for whether it be for math or science or history, things, learning tools, lots of things like that get sold secondhand over and over again to other homeschoolers at these giant swaps. And so I grew up with a ton of books, but it was always just kind of the luck of the draw. You know, you pick up this book based on the cover or based on the synopsis. A lot of times they're older hardbacks that don't have a dust jacket, and so they don't even have a synopsis. So you're literally just going by the title and the genre. That's kind of how I grew up. So I grew up with a ton of books, but not necessarily access to any and everything that I might have wanted. So as a kid, I kind of struggled to get rid of things because it was always, what if you need this? What if you want to do this? I want to do this project, but I've had it for 5 years and I've never done it. Am I going to do it? And I didn't understand a lot of the mindset things that were such struggles for me because I would want to get rid of the thing, but the anxiety would just bubble up and I couldn't do it, or I could do it, but it was hard. As a young adult, like age 20, I discovered minimalism. And I started reading and listening and watching and all of the things. And I was on this journey, but I never really got the complete mindset shift until I read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. This is a kind of the most famous of the minimalism or decluttering or organizing books. And a lot of people, I think, have a great deal of misconceptions about what the book actually talks about. But that was the thing that really shifted my mindset. It was, okay, you don't have to keep this just because it was a gift. You don't have to keep this just because your fantasy self would do this thing. You don't have to keep this because you loved it 5 years ago. All of these things really allowed me to get rid of things that I had struggled to get rid of that were bogging down my life, because most people in America, kind of regardless of income, have too many things. They might not have what they need or what they want, but they have other things that are kind of cluttering their home and their life and making their day-to-day life harder because you have to look for things, and that's just kind of the reality. And that's why we have all these storage units and other things. That's kind of its own discussion. So all of that to say, I never quite got to what you might picture as a minimalist. There's also a lot of misconceptions about minimalism because there are people that own 27 items and sleep on a sleeping bag in their apartment because they have no furniture, because that's the lifestyle that they chose. And that's not what most minimalists are. That's definitely a very extreme version of it. Minimalism tends to just mean you just have the things that serve you. You don't have a bunch of stuff that you're not using and don't want and are just cluttering your life. That's the definition that I identify with, that I think is a goal that is worthy of. It's not, I just want to have less stuff. I think once you get rid of the things, you either get more extreme with it because you're looking for that continued high, or you find something else to fill that space, whether it's a hobby or something you're doing with your time or what have you. That was where I was. I had a very decluttered house, and then I got pregnant with my third child, and we got a puppy. So my productivity went way down. I am not like on the moral high ground here. I'm not a perfect minimalist. I'm not trying to be. And also, I don't think that owning less things or buying less things or having more, either one, I don't think that it's morally superior to the other. So that is not where I'm coming from. I'm not judging. This is just things that I have learned, and I hear a lot in the booktube community, and I'm like, well, the minimalist movement answer is this. So in the description, I will have linked books, YouTube channels, and podcasts, and several things that have really impacted the way I think about things, if this is something that you are wanting to delve farther into. Okay, so all of that, let's get into my actual notes. Going with the more high ground thing, I don't care what any individual chooses to do with their money, their time, their resources, their space in their home. None of that is my business. So I am not judging you if you don't do what I do, right? But I think a lot of times we think, well, as long as I can afford it, that's all that I have to worry about. And that's not true, because taking care of your things requires some of your life. You have to dust it, you have to maintain it, you have to use space in your home. It is visual clutter and mental clutter, even if it's something that you want, so it's not clutter. It's still things that are taking your resources mentally, physically, and space-wise. A lot of times, especially with books, we have books that we wanted to read at one time, or we loved at one time, or if we could just read every book in the world that we possibly wanted to read, then we would read this book. We have these books for our past selves and for our fantasy selves, but that's not where we live, right? You are not going to read every book that you come across that you're like, oh, that sounds good. It's never, ever going to happen for anybody, regardless of the rate that you read or the amount of time you get to read. You are still limited. And so a lot of times we hold on to books because of the money that we spent on them, or because we did want to read them, or because we did love them. But just because I loved a book 20 years ago doesn't mean I have to physically own it now. They don't mean the same thing. You can love a book and still not physically own it. It's okay to go through seasons. It's okay to change your mindset. It's okay to have more and have less in different periods of time. So maybe you started out thinking, I don't want to do a ton of book hauls. Maybe you started out thinking, I do want to do a ton of book hauls. Maybe you have always wanted an entire library in your home. I think that was a dream for almost every reader at some point in time. But you can also change your mind. Maybe you have animals now and kids now, or just a smaller living space, whatever it might be. There might be reasons why having a massive book collection doesn't work for you, or hey, now it does. Now I have the space. Now I have the resources, the mental bandwidth, the budget, whatever it is. Maybe you now can have a book collection and you've decided, hey, I really do want that. And so you do. You don't have to just stick to your guns on everything. For instance, I don't buy a lot of books. This has been something that I've referenced a great deal in my channel because it is the way I read. I changed my mind. If I suddenly have a ton of disposable income and choose to use it to support authors that I love, that doesn't mean that I traded away my morals. You can have different seasons. So a lot of times we hold on to things because of the money that we spent on them. But holding on to the item isn't worth the money that you spent. It's not like you have that $20 because you held on to the hardcover. The money was spent regardless of what happens to the item. Whether you keep it or not, you already spent the money. That item is not representative of that money. If you resold it, it would not be worth the same that you paid for it. And on the rare instance where the value goes up, that's not worth holding on to everything that you come in contact with. Every item in your house takes your resources. It takes your space, it takes your mental, it takes time because you're having to look through all these items to find the one item that you're looking for. If you have an extensive book collection and you organize it, or you reorganize it, or you change how it's organized, maybe you had authors, now maybe you have genres, then maybe you have colors, whatever. It takes time and effort beyond the money that you spent on it, which is fine. If you want to spend your time organizing your books because that makes you happy, more power to you. I am not arguing with that. I'm simply saying that it is a fact that it takes your time and your resources and your money, and you can choose to spend them on books. You can choose to spend them on thousands of books. I don't care. More power to you. But I think sometimes we are not aware of the amounts of our life that our possessions are taking. And that's kind of the entire point of this talk, is just to be aware. And if you choose to have a lot of books, knowing what it's costing you, or that it's not necessary for your happiness, or maybe this book brings a great deal of happiness, but these ones don't, and you're holding on to them because at one point they did, that's it. It's just knowing only you can decide which things really truly add value to your life. But being a reader doesn't mean you have to own books, and owning books doesn't make you a reader, and owning books doesn't make you bad, and not owning books doesn't make you good. That's kind of the whole point. It's just you decide what is good for you. I do want to briefly touch on budget, because I think the thing is, we make a lot of jokes about, I have no self-control, I went on a buying spree, I need to go on a book ban, oh, I broke the book ban, it's 20 minutes later. We make a lot of jokes about these things, and for some people, I thrive on sarcasm. For some people, it is just jokes. They are well within their budget, within their means. They're totally fine. But other people are spending money that they should not spend. And so I just think that we should be aware of the language and the things that we use for our book hauls and for buying books. Be aware that nobody should be spending money that they don't have. But if you do, maybe don't joke about it as, I'm broke, I spent all my money on books. I mean, that's not great. Obviously, you can make your own decision, but it's not great, and I don't think it should really be a part of our booktube culture if we could avoid it. So here's the thing. A lot of times people get books or any item, but we're talking about books, because it's free or because it's 99 cents. And again, I'm not saying that I'm better than you or that this viewpoint is better. But a lot of times you might get 60 books every single month because they were free ebooks. But if you're not reading them, then it does become clutter. It becomes things to search through to find the thing that you really do want to read. And, you know, it's not a bad thing to have 1,000 books on your Kindle, but it's something that is taking up your mental space as you search through it. And if it's not necessary, you might want to get rid of some of the things that you're like, okay, I'm never going to read this. You can't read all the books. And there is no shame in owning books that you haven't read. But also, the way that I deal with this, and I think it works really well, I know it works really well for me. It may or may not work really well for you. Because if I want to read a book, and I'm not going to pick up right that second, I put it on my Goodreads list. And I delete things off my Goodreads list all the time. And if I didn't buy the book, then it doesn't matter. So sometimes, you know, I see a book, I put it on my Goodreads, I get it on Kindle Unlimited, or I buy it, or I get it from the library and I read it right away. But that's not going to happen for every single book. So most of the time it just goes on my Goodreads list and I delete it. I try to keep my Goodreads list pretty short because I find it overwhelming to constantly have 900 books that, hey, you want to read one of these. That doesn't work great for me. And that is definitely something that I've come to through the process of minimalism. But, you know, some people have every book that they've heard of that they want to read in the last 10 years on their Goodreads list. Okay, but that doesn't work for me. And I can't imagine being like that. Since you can't read all the books, scarcity mindset with books doesn't work phenomenally because you do just accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, and it ends up being a barrier to you actually getting to read. Obviously, retail therapy is a thing if you want to do retail therapy on your books, and if you are watching your budget and you want to do your retail therapy on free ebooks, look, I'm not judging you, okay? But you might just want to think about whether that's serving you or not. And if it is serving you, great. Again, I don't care. I don't care what any single person does. I do not judge my friends for having many, many, many bookcases of books. I don't. I think that sometimes this is easier to deal with if you do have a cap, and that can be, okay, I have 4 bookshelves, I can't get more bookshelves. Or it can be, I can only have 100 books on my Goodreads TBR. Or it can be, I have $200 to spend. You know, whatever your cap is. But I think rather than just leaving it all up to chance, it is good to kind of have, this is my container. This is my boundary. This is the limit that I have. And I can choose to do whatever I want within that limit, but this is my limit and this is what I'm going to go with. That can just be kind of a hack to deal with it. And it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter what the cap is. It doesn't matter if your cap is physical space, budget, or just mentally, look, I'm always going to be hearing about new books, so I'm going to try to not have 900 books that I've already heard about that I'm trying to read. It doesn't matter. And also, whatever, do what you want, but it is a hack. I know for me, I tend to not put books that I would have to buy on my TBR list because I do mainly use the library and Kindle Unlimited. So most of the time, if it's going on my to-read list, I've already checked to make sure that it's available through one of those options. And this just helps. It's just a kind of a natural limit for me. This does have exceptions, but for the most part, that's how I do it. And I've also noticed if I do have to buy a book, I am benefited by reading it right away. If I don't, it does tend to just stay. Booktube, obviously we have books in our backgrounds. We have them as decorations. For Bookstagram, you have them to take pretty pictures with. Sometimes you have it so you can hold it up in a video. I for sure prefer to just put a picture in. 1, because I usually don't own the book, and 2, because then I don't have to use my wrist the whole time. So a lot of times people own their books for their content creation. That's fine. I think that I am proof that you don't have to do that. But if you want to, I'm certainly not arguing with you. And then there are the special editions. They're beautiful. I don't judge anybody for wanting those. But sometimes you own 9 different copies of a book, which again, it's your space. But I think we do tend to normalize it when we're already a extreme fringe of readers almost, because we are literally making bookish content and consuming bookish content as well as books themselves. And most of us read a ridiculous amount compared to the average person. I know Ashley from Bookish Realm has definitely referenced this when she is talking about how many books we tend to promote in our wrap-ups and things like that. We also tend to hold on to books because they were gifts, or maybe they were free from the publisher or the author or what have you. A lot of times we just have a lot of books that we're not actually reading, which again, there is no right answer for everybody, but I don't think that you have to own a book just because you love it. And I think a lot of times people tend to not realize that and understand that because they're just consuming Booktube content and they aren't hearing anything else. I will say, for sure, 100%, books are not the place to start your minimalism journey. So if you are feeling very defensive about how I can't get rid of any of my books, well, books are not what you start with. Most people start with clothes or with kitchen items or things like that. Those are the places that people tend to recommend that you start with. Nobody recommends a reader start getting rid of things by getting rid of their books. You can't do it. It's a muscle that you have to build up. And books are sentimental to us. They are valuable to us by virtue of the idea that every book has the possibility to be our next favorite. So that's not where you start. I think a big part of this about how many books you should own or have on your TBR or have on your Kindle is, do unread books feel like a to-do for you? Or do they fill you with excitement or possibilities? Or is it almost a shame game of, I haven't gotten to this yet, I need to get to this. I've been saying I should read this book for 3 years. And only you can answer that. For me, they do feel like to-dos if it's been on there for a long time. New books that I'm putting on my to-read list don't necessarily feel like this. They feel more of a possibility item. But if it's been on there for a while, it feels more like a to-do. Like, oh, I have not gotten to this book yet. And you know I DNF like crazy. I'm a huge advocate for DNFing. I think we should all do it. But sometimes we're just like, oh, dude, just try the book. Like, you can DNF it in 10 pages. It's been on your list forever. Either you are going to really, really like it, or you can just DNF it. But again, you can't get to all of them. And so I do tend to delete without even checking them. Yeah, my mood reading self does not do great with books that have been on the list for a long, long time. That's kind of another reason why I delete them off the list, because then if it comes back up, like Kate Daniels by Ilona Andrews, book 8, I think, I've taken that on and off my list frequently, because if it just sits on there, it gets stale, it gets stagnant, and it just becomes like, oh, you haven't done this. But if I take it off and then I hear somebody talking about it, like I always do, and I'm like, oh, I really do want to read that, then I just put it back on the list. It's no biggie. I do this a lot for books that I know I will hear about frequently. I don't know, it works for me and my mood reading self. But yeah, some people really like to have their physical books be their TBR. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't think it's required. And if you do think it's required, just feel your own emotions. Evaluate how you feel about it. That's it. That's the whole thing. So your life only has room for 3 big balls, pretty much. That can be your career, your family. If you are the sole homemaker, that's like 28 hours out of your week. So you only have room for 3 big ones, and then obviously there are little ones that go in there. But whenever you bring something new into your life, something else has to go out. You only have so much bandwidth. I know for me, Booktube has taken up quite a bit of my organizing, decluttering time. It also has taken quite a bit of my reading time. And that was a sacrifice that I was willing to make. But it did push things out of my life so that this could come in. That's just a fact. If you have kids or animals or a partner, or if you buy a house when you just had an apartment, or you get a career that requires more hours, whatever it is, or you start reading more books, does not matter what it is. If you bring something new into your life, it pushes something else out. And so that's why it is important to kind of let go of the things that you used to do that you don't do anymore. Just because you scrapbooked 5 years ago doesn't mean you have to have a room's worth of scrapbooking stuff if you don't do it anymore. That doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you a failure. We're humans, we evolve, we grow. You are not going to always have the same hobbies and do the same things. And for sure, you're not always going to want to read the same books that you wanted to read 5 years ago. So it's important to let them go at some point in time. Obviously, I tend to do this more, I would say, than the average booktuber, but there are lots of people who haul and unhaul regularly, and that's totally fine, but they are aware, hey, this is my space. If I want to bring more in, I have to let some out, but that is true of your time, of your mental ability, of your energy. Every resource available to you is finite, it is limited, and so you have to replace things, and that's okay. In conclusion, minimalism is about having things that actually serve you. They don't serve your past self. They don't serve your fantasy self, that person who would totally write thank you cards for everybody, for everything, but you actually don't. That's your fantasy self. It's just about serving you. And if having bookcases in every room in your house serves you, okay. But have you actually evaluated that? Have you actually asked yourself, hey, how does this make me feel? I just want to encourage you to evaluate that for yourself. Kind of feel free to get rid of books. It doesn't make you a bad person. And I would say that most booktubers probably do have too many books. And it can feel like to-dos, and it can feel like wasted space or money or time. But only you can decide what that number is for you and which books fit into it. Yeah, I kind of just wanted to talk about this from the perspective of somebody who has spent more time learning about minimalism than I even have on Booktube, and just reminding you that there are a lot of different perspectives, but also not everybody can do the same thing. If everybody did what I did, then authors wouldn't be paid, right? But I think sometimes we're like, we're supporting the industry, and it's like, well, that's not a good reason for you to spend your time and money and home space and life supporting an industry. If it works for you, great, but don't just justify it based on the world at large. You kind of have to bring it down to a micro level and say, for me as an individual, is this the right choice for me in my life? And I would just like to see more of that. So tell me what you think. Have you ever listened to a minimalist anything in your entire life? Do you feel like Booktube is just bye, bye, bye? Are you happy with your collection of books? Are you really trying to grow it? Are you trying to manage it? Whether that be ebook or physical book, just let me know your thoughts, and hopefully got this out clearly. I don't know. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.